Sign these divorce papers now, you useless woman, or you'll pay every hospital bill yourself.
What have I...
The words cut through Rebecca Okery's screams as another contraction tore through her body, sharp and violent, ripping away whatever dignity she had left. She gripped the hospital bed rails with white knuckles, sweat pouring down her face in streams, tears mixing with the unbearable pain as her swollen belly heaved uncontrollably. The fluorescent lights above buzzed indifferently. The machines beeped their mechanical rhythm, and her husband Emeka stood over her. Not with comfort, not with love, but with a clipboard and a pen. Behind him, a woman in a fitted red dress laughed softly, the sound deliberate and cruel.
Vanessa,
his mistress. 6 months pregnant herself, her hand resting proudly on her belly like a trophy, the diamond ring on her finger catching the cold hospital light. Please, Emeka, Rebecca gasped between contractions, her voice breaking into fragments. I'm having your baby. Please just wait. Children can be made again, he said coldly, his eyes empty of anything resembling mercy. But mistakes like marrying you can't be undone. Another contraction slammed through Rebecca's body. She screamed, clutching her stomach, her legs trembling violently. A nurse moved forward instinctively, her face twisted with concern and anger. But then Emeka's mother Ngozi entered the room, her presence filling the space like a dark cloud. She wore a satisfied smile, the kind that comes from finally getting what you always wanted. She never belonged in this family, Ngozi declared loudly, as if Rebecca weren't even there. Poverty is contagious. Money slipped discreetly into the nurse's hand. The nurse froze, looked down at the bills, then stepped back silently. Her protest died in her throat. Rebecca's mind flashed through 4 years of sacrifice. For years of waking up before dawn to cook meals Emeka barely thanked her for. For years of selling her grandmother's jewelry piece by piece to fund his failed businesses, while he promised her things would get better. For years of standing by him when his own family dismissed him as worthless, believing that love was endurance, believing that humility was strength, believing that if she just stayed quiet and patient and faithful, it would all mean something. And now, in her weakest hour, while her body broke open to bring his child into the world, she was being erased. Emeka dropped the pen onto her chest. It rolled against her skin, cold and foreign. If you don't sign, he said, his voice flat and final, you'll pay every hospital bill yourself. And we both know you can't afford that. With trembling fingers, Rebecca picked up the pen. Her vision blurred. Her hand shook so badly she could barely control it.
But she signed.
She signed her name on the dotted line while another contraction ripped through her, while Vanessa's laughter echoed in the background, while Ngozi watched with cold satisfaction. Emeka snatched the papers immediately, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. Good, he said. Security will make sure you don't disturb us again. He turned and walked out with Vanessa on his arm, his mother and sister trailing behind them, their voices already discussing celebrations and new beginnings. None of them looked back. None of them knew they had just signed their own destruction. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Stories like this matter because they show that cruelty has consequences and that women discarded at their weakest can rise to reclaim everything stolen from them. The sharp scent of antiseptic mixed with sweat filled the private labor room as Rebecca Okery screamed through another violent contraction, her hands clawing at the sides of the bed while tears streamed freely down her cheeks. Her swollen belly rose and fell like a tide she could no longer control, and just when she thought the pain could not deepen, the door burst open and her husband Emeka walked in wearing a dark suit untouched by worry, his face hardened not by fear for his wife or unborn child, but by irritation. Behind him walked a young woman in a fitted red dress. Vanessa. Her laughter floated cruelly behind him, as though this were theater rather than childbirth, her hand resting proudly on her own pregnant belly, the diamond ring on her finger catching the hospital light. Without greeting or concern, Emeka thrust a clipboard toward Rebecca's shaking hands, jabbing his finger at the document. Sign the divorce papers, he barked. I'm done pretending to be married to a woman who has nothing to show for herself. Rebecca gasped between contractions, her voice breaking. Emeka, please. I'm having your baby. Please wait. Children can be made again, he said coldly. But mistakes like marrying you can't be undone. His mother Ngozi entered behind them, followed by his sister, their faces hard with familiar cruelty. She's always been dramatic, his sister sighed. Even now. Ngozi leaned closer to the bed, her voice dripping with satisfaction. You never belonged in this family, Rebecca. Poverty is contagious. A nurse stepped forward to protest, but money slipped discreetly into her pocket, silenced her objection. Rebecca's mind flashed through 4 years of quiet sacrifice. Waking up early to cook for Emeka when he had no job. Selling her grandmother's gold jewelry to fund his first failed business. Standing by him when his own family dismissed him. Believing love was endurance. Believing humility was strength. Believing that silence would be rewarded. And now here she was, stripped of dignity at her weakest hour, forced to hold a pen with trembling fingers while her belly heaved in agony. If you don't sign, Emeka threatened, you'll pay every hospital bill yourself. And we both know you can't afford that. Another contraction tore through Rebecca's body. She screamed, clutching her stomach, fear and pain consuming her. Emeka dropped the pen onto her chest. With shaking fingers, she picked it up and signed. Emeka snatched the papers, satisfied. Good. Security will make sure you don't disturb us again. He strode out triumphantly with Vanessa on his arm and his family trailing behind, unaware that they had just signed their own downfall. The door closed. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of machines and Rebecca's broken cries. Another contraction tore through her body, stronger than the last. Push, Rebecca, the nurse whispered, her voice shaking. Your baby needs you. Rebecca pushed through the pain, through the betrayal, through the terror. Minutes later, a small cry filled the room. It's a girl, the nurse said gently, placing the baby on Rebecca's chest. Rebecca looked down through blurred eyes at her daughter's tiny fingers curling around her skin, as if she knew this was the only safe place left. Rebecca broke down completely. I'm here, she whispered through sobs. I won't leave you. I promise. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Stories like this matter because they show that cruelty has consequences and that women discarded at their weakest can rise to reclaim everything stolen from them. The next morning, a nurse quietly helped Rebecca dress and pack the few items in her small hospital bag. No flowers had arrived during the night. No apologetic text messages. No family waiting in the lobby with balloons and congratulations. Just silence and the soft weight of her newborn daughter bundled against her chest. Rebecca walked out of the private hospital alone, her body still aching from labor, her heart hollowed out by betrayal. The Lagos sun felt too bright, too indifferent to her pain. She flagged down a taxi and asked the driver to take her somewhere cheap, somewhere she could afford for just one night. He dropped her at a modest guest house near the hospital, the kind with peeling paint and flickering lights in the hallway. The room was small, clean enough, with a single bed and a window that rattled when the wind picked up. Rebecca laid her daughter gently on the bed, surrounding her with pillows, then sat on the floor and stared at nothing. Hours passed. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the storm that had accompanied her arrival into the world. Rebecca couldn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up somewhere between signing those papers and pushing her child into existence. By evening, rain began to fall. First softly, then violently, battering the thin window as thunder rolled across the sky. Rebecca lay on her back beside her daughter, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and the question circled her mind like a vulture. How can a woman give everything and still be discarded like nothing? For years of love. 4 years of sacrifice. For years of believing that if she just endured a little longer, if she stayed humble and patient and kind, it would all mean something. But it meant nothing. Her phone vibrated weakly on the nightstand. The battery icon flashed red. 4% remaining. An unfamiliar number lit up the screen. Rebecca ignored it. She had no energy for scam calls or wrong numbers. The phone rang again.
And again.
Finally, with a sigh of frustration, Rebecca picked it up and pressed it to her ear. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely there. "Rebecca Okery," a woman's voice said calmly, clearly, without hesitation. "Please don't hang up." Rebecca sat up slowly, her heart beginning to race. "You have the wrong person." "No," the woman replied gently. "You're the right person. Rebecca Okery is not your real name." Rebecca's throat tightened. "What are you talking about?" "My name is Lydia Adebayo," the woman continued. "I'm a legal representative. We've been searching for you for decades." Rebecca's hands trembled as she gripped the phone tighter. "Stop.
Please.
I don't understand." "I'm outside your guest house right now," Lydia said softly, "with a man who has been crying since he heard you survived childbirth. If you give us 5 minutes, we can prove everything." Rebecca stood shakily and moved toward the window. Outside, under a flickering streetlight, sat a black luxury SUV. 2 figures stood beside it in the rain. An older man in a dark coat, a sharp-looking woman holding a folder close to her chest. They weren't rushing. They were waiting. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating their faces. "Who are you?" she whispered into the phone. "We're the people who've been looking for you," Lydia said. "And we need you to know the truth." Rebecca opened the door slowly, her newborn still sleeping peacefully on the bed behind her. Lydia stepped inside first, followed by an older man whose movements were careful, deliberate, as though his body carried more weight than it could bear. The investigator who had driven them remained by the door, closing it gently behind them. Lydia's eyes were soft as she looked at Rebecca. "Are you safe? Are you alone?" Rebecca nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. "Just me and my daughter." "Good," Lydia said, sitting carefully on the edge of the small chair. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you've been through hell. But please just listen." The elderly man stood near the window, his hands trembling as he stared at Rebecca. His eyes were red, swollen from crying. He looked fragile, but there was something commanding about him, something that spoke of power held for decades. "My name is Chief Benjamin Adebayo," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "And you are my daughter." Rebecca shook her head, stepping back.
No.
"That's impossible. My parents." "The people who raised you were not your parents," Lydia interrupted gently. "Rebecca, you were stolen from a hospital 30 years ago during political unrest. A woman took you during the chaos. She raised you as her own and never told you the truth." Rebecca's legs gave out. She sank onto the bed beside her sleeping daughter, her hands covering her mouth. Chief Adebayo moved closer, tears streaming freely down his weathered face. "Your mother, Catherine, died the night you were born. Complications during delivery. I held you for 10 minutes before the nurses took you to be cleaned and monitored. When I went to find you an hour later, you were gone. Vanished. I searched everywhere," he continued, his voice thick with grief. "I hired investigators, offered rewards, threatened officials. For 30 years, I never stopped looking. And 3 days ago, we finally found the connection. A birth record that didn't match. A name that appeared out of nowhere. Rebecca Okery." Lydia opened the folder she'd been holding. Inside were documents, hospital records, DNA results, and photographs. One photo showed a young woman holding a newborn baby. Same eyes. Same nose. Same delicate curve of the jaw. "That's Catherine," Lydia said quietly. "Your biological mother." Rebecca's vision blurred as tears fell. "She looks like me." "You look like her," Chief Adebayo whispered. Lydia's voice became more urgent. "Rebecca, your father owns Anderson Global Industries. Banks, real estate, hospitals across West Africa, including the private hospital in Lekki where you gave birth yesterday." Rebecca looked up sharply, her breath catching. "The same hospital where your husband humiliated you," Lydia continued. "The same hospital that is now legally yours." Chief Adebayo sat down heavily, his breathing labored.
I'm dying, Rebecca.
"Cancer," The doctors say I have months, maybe less. I've spent my entire life building an empire while searching for you. And now that I've found you, I need you to understand something. He reached out and took her hand gently. Powerful people worked very hard to keep you lost, he said. My younger brother has been running my companies for years. He blocked every lead. He buried every clue. Because if you were found, he would lose everything. Rebecca's mind spun. Why would he do that? Because you're my heir, Chief Adebayo said simply. And he's been stealing from me for decades. Lydia leaned forward. You're in danger if they find out you exist before we're ready. You need time to learn, to grow strong. Time to become the woman who can protect herself and this empire. Rebecca looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at the frail man whose eyes mirrored her own. What do you need me to do? She whispered. Chief Adebayo smiled through his tears. Let me teach you everything before I go. That night, Rebecca was moved into Chief Adebayo's estate, a sprawling mansion in Ikoyi that felt more like a museum than a home. Doctors, nurses, and staff appeared quietly, treating her with a respect she had never known. Her daughter slept in a nursery that had been prepared within hours, and Rebecca found herself sitting across from her father in a study lined with books and documents that represented decades of carefully built power. My brother thought if he kept you lost long enough, I would die and he would inherit everything, Chief Adebayo said, his voice steady despite his frail body. He paid people to bury leads. He redirected investigators. He even had hospital records altered or destroyed. Rebecca's hands tightened in her lap. How could someone do that? Greed, her father said simply. Greed makes people capable of anything. Over the following days, Lydia and a team of lawyers worked around the clock. Chief Adebayo transferred everything into Rebecca's name. Not through public announcements or press releases, but through quiet legal maneuvers that would take months for anyone to discover. Shell companies, trust funds, holding corporations with names that meant nothing to outsiders but controlled everything that mattered. This isn't about revenge, Chief Adebayo told her one evening as they sat together. Revenge is loud and short-lived. This is about justice, and justice requires patience. Rebecca nodded, though she didn't fully understand yet. She was still the woman who had been forced to sign divorce papers in a labor room, still the woman whose husband had called her useless. The transformation felt impossible, but Chief Adebayo saw something in her that she couldn't see in herself. Power used quietly lasts longer than anger shouted aloud, he said. Learn that lesson, and no one will ever be able to break you again. So Rebecca began to study. Every night after her daughter fell asleep, she sat at a desk with contracts, financial statements, and legal documents spread before her. At first, the language confused her. The numbers felt overwhelming. She had budgeted household expenses, not corporate acquisitions. She had managed groceries, not leverage and interest rates. But every time exhaustion threatened to pull her under, she remembered Emeka's face, his cold eyes, Vanessa's laughter, Ngozi's cruel satisfaction. And she kept going. Lydia taught her how hospitals operated, how debts were structured, how reputations were built and destroyed. Rebecca learned about holding companies that could purchase loans without revealing the true buyer. She learned how information could be gathered quietly, legally, and used strategically. One afternoon, Lydia placed a file on Rebecca's desk. Emeka Okori, Lydia said quietly. His business is drowning. He owes money to 12 different lenders. His credit is destroyed. He's surviving by borrowing from new sources to pay old debts. Rebecca opened the file slowly. Pages of financial records stared back at her. Loan agreements, missed payments, desperate emails to investors. What are you suggesting? Rebecca asked. Lydia's expression remained neutral. I'm suggesting that those debts could be purchased. Quietly. Through companies he would never trace back to you. And once you own his debts, you own his future. Rebecca looked down at her sleeping daughter in the bassinet beside her desk, then back at the file. Do it, she said quietly. Lydia nodded and left the room. Rebecca returned to her studies, but something had shifted inside her. She was no longer just surviving. She was becoming someone new. Someone Emeka would never recognize. Someone he should have never underestimated. Months passed in a blur of late nights and early mornings. Rebecca's days became a rhythm of feeding her daughter, studying financial statements, learning corporate law, and understanding the intricate web of power that her father had spent decades weaving. Tutors came and went, patient but demanding, teaching her things she had never imagined she would need to know. At first, she felt completely lost. The language of business was foreign to her. Terms like leveraged buyouts, fiduciary duty, and equity stakes swirled in her mind like a storm she couldn't calm. She had spent years budgeting groceries, not managing multi-million-dollar acquisitions. She had cleaned homes, not navigated boardrooms. She had measured her worth in meals cooked and laundry folded, not in shares and influence. There were nights when she wanted to quit. Nights when the exhaustion felt too heavy, when the information refused to stick, when she looked at herself in the mirror and saw only the woman Emeka had discarded, not the heiress her father believed she could become. But then she would remember. She would remember the delivery room, the sharp scent of antiseptic mixed with her own sweat. Emeka's cold eyes as he thrust the clipboard toward her trembling hands. His voice calling her useless, saying she had nothing to show for herself. Vanessa's cruel laughter floating behind him like mockery made flesh. Ngozi declaring that poverty was contagious. And she would sit back down at her desk and keep going. Chief Adebayo watched her transformation from his sickbed, his body growing weaker as the cancer spread, but his eyes sharp and proud. One evening, Lydia came to check on him and found him staring out the window toward the study where Rebecca worked late into the night. "She's going to be extraordinary," he said quietly. Lydia smiled. "She already is." "No," Chief Adebayo said, shaking his head slightly. "She's stronger than you think. Just like her mother. Catherine had that same fire beneath the gentleness. That same steel wrapped in softness. People always underestimated her too." He paused, his breathing labored. "Rebecca doesn't even know her own power yet. But she will. And when she does, the people who broke her will wish they had shown mercy." Rebecca wasn't transforming through rage or bitterness. She wasn't driven by hatred or the need for spectacle. She was transforming through knowledge, through discipline, through the quiet accumulation of power that her father had taught her to value above all else. She stopped thinking like someone who needed to survive and started thinking like someone who was becoming. The woman who had once believed love was endurance and silence was strength now understood that true strength was knowledge, that real power was patience, and that justice didn't rush. She was no longer the woman who had signed those divorce papers. She was becoming the woman who would own the room where it happened. Tell me in the comments. If you were Rebecca, would you seek revenge or simply walk away with your new life? And where are you watching from? United States, UK, Canada, Jamaica, Nigeria, or anywhere else in the world? Rebecca waited 4 months. 4 months of silence. 4 months of studying while her daughter grew stronger in her arms. 4 months of letting the people who broke her believe she had simply disappeared into the poverty they always said would consume her. Emeka never called. Never texted. Never asked about his daughter. In his mind, Rebecca Okere had become exactly what he always believed she was: nothing. But Rebecca wasn't nothing anymore. She sat in her father's study one evening, Lydia across from her with a folder thick with documents. Chief Adebayo was sleeping in the next room, his breathing shallow and labored, his time running short. "It's time," Rebecca said quietly. Lydia nodded. "Are you sure you're ready?" Rebecca looked down at her hands, the same hands that had trembled while signing divorce papers, the same hands that had clutched her newborn daughter while crying alone. Those hands were steady now. "I'm ready," she said. The next morning, an announcement went out through corporate channels. An emergency shareholders meeting at Anderson Global Industries. The parent company that now quietly controlled Emeka's debts, owned the private hospital in Lekki where Rebecca had given birth, and held significant stakes in multiple businesses across Lagos that desperate entrepreneurs like Emeka needed to survive. The reason given was strategic and irresistible. A powerful new controlling investor wanted to meet with key stakeholders and partners. Decisions would be made that would determine which businesses would receive continued support and which would be allowed to collapse under the weight of their own failures. The invitation list was carefully curated. Business owners drowning in debt. Investors looking for Joe lifelines. People who had burned too many bridges and had nowhere left to turn. Emeka Okori received a personal invitation delivered by courier to his modest apartment in Surulere, a far cry from the luxury he had once pretended to afford. He opened the envelope with shaking hands, read the embossed letter once, then twice, his eyes widening with each word. Anderson Global Industries wanted to meet with him. They were reviewing his loan portfolio. There was potential for restructuring, for relief, for salvation. Emeka stood up from his worn couch and laughed for the first time in weeks, the sound sharp and desperate. "This is it," he said aloud to the empty room. He immediately called his mother, his voice breathless with hope. "Mama, this meeting will save us. Anderson Global wants to meet with me. They're considering debt restructuring." Ngozi's voice crackled through the phone, excited and calculating. "You must go. Dress well. Take Vanessa. Show them you are a serious man with a family." Emeka agreed. He would bring Vanessa, now heavily pregnant and increasingly expensive to maintain. He would bring his polished lies and his manufactured confidence. He would walk into that boardroom believing he was about to be rescued. He had no idea what he was walking into. Across town, in the study of a mansion he would never see, Rebecca closed the folder Lydia had given her and stood slowly. She walked to the window and looked out over the Lagos skyline, the city lights flickering like stars fallen to earth. "Send the final confirmations," Rebecca said quietly. "Make sure everyone on the list attends." Lydia smiled slightly. "It's done." Rebecca turned back to face her. "And the media?" "Cameras will be positioned exactly where you requested," Lydia confirmed. "Everything will be documented." Rebecca nodded once, her face calm, her eyes clear. The trap was set. The boardroom of Anderson Global Industries filled slowly with the carefully chosen guests. Investors in expensive suits took their seats around the polished mahogany table. Board members murmured quietly among themselves. Media cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking steadily, capturing everything. Emeka arrived with Vanessa on his arm, her pregnancy now in its final weeks, her fitted dress expensive and carefully chosen. His mother Ngozi walked behind them, her head held high, whispering to his sister about connections and influence and how this meeting would finally restore their family's dignity. They believed they were about to be rescued. Emeka straightened his tie and smoothed his suit jacket as they took their seats near the front. He looked around the room with barely concealed hope, calculating which investors he might approach after the meeting, which connections he might leverage. Then the doors at the far end of the boardroom opened. The room fell silent. Rebecca stepped inside. She didn't rush. She didn't scan the room nervously or check her notes. She walked with the measured grace of someone who already belonged there, someone who owned every inch of space she moved through. Her dress was elegant, perfectly tailored, a deep navy that spoke of quiet authority. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that was calm, composed, unreadable. Emeka frowned. Something about her unsettled him, stirred a memory he couldn't quite place. He leaned forward slightly, squinting. Rebecca reached the podium at the front of the room and paused, allowing the silence to stretch and deepen. Only then did she lift her eyes. They met Emeka's directly. Recognition hit him like ice water. His mouth fell open. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Rebecca placed her hands on the podium, her voice clear and even. "My name is Rebecca Adebayo," she said. "I am the biological daughter of Chief Benjamin Adebayo and the sole heir to Anderson Global Industries." The room exploded. Gasps tore through the silence. Board members stood. Cameras flashed wildly. Investors turned to each other in shock and confusion. Emeka's face drained of all color. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. Rebecca didn't raise her voice. She simply waited for the chaos to settle, her expression never changing. I called this meeting, she continued calmly, because too many people in this room have built their futures on lies. She pressed a button on the podium. The screen behind her filled with documents. Bank statements.
Wire transfers.
Forged signatures. Evidence of embezzlement and fraud stretching back years. Federal agents are waiting outside, Rebecca said. They're here to arrest those responsible. The doors opened. Agents in dark suits entered the room. Her uncle stood up from the board table, shouting, "This is a setup. She's lying." He tried to push past them. They grabbed him, forced him down, and snapped handcuffs around his wrists as cameras captured every moment. His protests turned to screams as he was dragged from the room. Rebecca waited until the doors closed behind him. Then she turned her gaze to Emeka. "You divorced me in a hospital room while I was in labor," she said quietly, each word precise and deliberate. "You called me useless. You said I was nothing but a poor housewife with no goals." Emeka shook his head weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "Rebecca, please." She lifted another file. "You forged my signature on multiple loan documents. You buried me in debt under my name and walked away smiling while I struggled to survive."
The screen changed.
More documents appeared. Loan agreements. Forged signatures. Financial records. "I reversed everything," Rebecca said. "Every loan. Every bill. Every fraudulent debt. And I purchased every legitimate debt you actually owe." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "No bank will ever lend to you again. No company will ever invest in you. I've made sure of that." Emeka collapsed into his chair, his entire body shaking.
How?
"How did you?" Rebecca turned to Vanessa, who had been sitting frozen in horror. "And you," Rebecca said evenly. "The child you're carrying. It's not his, is it?" Vanessa's eyes widened. She clutched her stomach protectively. Rebecca pressed the button again. The screen filled with messages. Photos. Hotel receipts. DNA paternity test results. "The biological father is Chidi Okonkwo," Rebecca said. "The same man you've been planning with to steal money from Emeka once his debts were restructured." Vanessa screamed, standing abruptly.
No.
"This is a lie. You're lying." Emeka turned to her, his face twisted in disbelief and rage.
What?
"Vanessa, tell me this isn't true." Vanessa collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her face as cameras zoomed in, capturing her breakdown in excruciating detail. Rebecca's gaze moved to Ngozi, who sat frozen in her seat. "You humiliated me when I was at my weakest," Rebecca said softly. "You called poverty contagious. You taught cruelty and called it strength." Ngozi's face crumpled. She slid from her chair onto the floor, sobbing openly. All dignity gone. Rebecca stepped back from the podium. "I didn't come here to shout," she said. "I came to close the doors." She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. She never looked back. The footage from that boardroom went viral within hours. News outlets across Nigeria picked up the story. Social media exploded with commentary, outrage, and fascination. The woman forced to sign divorce papers in labor had risen to expose the man who broke her, and the entire country watched it unfold in real time. Emeka lost everything. His businesses collapsed within weeks. Every investor pulled out. Every loan was called in. The few associates who had still taken his calls stopped answering. His modest apartment in Surulere was repossessed. He moved back in with his mother, but even she could barely look at him, her own reputation destroyed by association. Vanessa's lies were exposed in every newspaper and blog. The DNA results were public record now. Chidi Okonkwo, the man she had been planning with, disappeared before authorities could question him. Vanessa gave birth alone in a public hospital, her family refusing to claim her, her future as uncertain as the child she had used as a weapon. Ngozi stopped leaving her house. Neighbors whispered when she walked by. Her church asked her not to return. The cruelty she had taught came back to her tenfold, and she had no armor against it. But Rebecca wasn't watching any of it. 3 days after the boardroom meeting, Chief Benjamin Adebayo died peacefully in his sleep. Rebecca sat beside him holding his hand, her daughter sleeping in a bassinet nearby. His breathing had grown shallow throughout the day, each breath a struggle. But when he opened his eyes one final time and saw Rebecca's face, he smiled. "My daughter found her way home," he whispered. Rebecca pressed her forehead to his hand and cried as his breathing stopped, as the monitors flatlined, as the life that had searched for her for 30 years finally let go. Months passed. Rebecca rebuilt Anderson Global Industries with a different philosophy. Transparency replaced secrecy. Honest practices replaced exploitation. She cleaned house, removing everyone complicit in her uncle's schemes, promoting those who had tried to do right despite the corruption around them. She established a foundation that funded shelters for abandoned women and single mothers. She created a program that paid hospital bills for mothers who had been left alone during childbirth, just as she had been. She rewrote hospital policies across every facility her company owned, ensuring that no woman would ever be humiliated during labor, that no vulnerable patient would be treated as less than human. Rebecca raised her daughter in the estate that had once felt like a museum, but now felt like home. She taught her that strength is not loud, that justice doesn't rush, that cruelty always comes back, but mercy builds legacies that outlast revenge. She never spoke Emika's name again.
She didn't need to.
The woman who had been forced to sign divorce papers while screaming in labor now signed contracts that protected thousands. The woman who had been called useless now employed hundreds. The woman who had walked out of a hospital alone now made sure no woman would ever have to do the same. Rebecca didn't rise through hatred. She rose through truth, patience, and the kind of quiet power that changes the world without ever needing to shout. Rebecca went from signing divorce papers in labor to owning the world that tried to erase her. The woman Emika called useless became the woman who controlled his future. The woman Ngozi said didn't belong became the woman who rebuilt an empire on principles they never understood. The woman forced to her weakest moment became the woman who proved that weakness is temporary but character is permanent. They didn't destroy her. They revealed her. Every humiliation was preparation. Every tear was clarity. Every moment of silence was her gathering strength they couldn't see because they were too busy celebrating her suffering. The moral of this story is simple but powerful. Never measure someone's worth by their weakest moment. A woman screaming in labor is not useless. She is creating life while you destroy hers. A woman with no money is not worthless. She simply hasn't stepped into her season yet. A woman who stays silent is not defeated. She may be learning the language of power you'll never master. Power, patience, and truth always outlast cruelty. Always. Cruelty burns hot and fast, leaving nothing but ash and regret. But patience builds foundations. Truth creates legacies. And power used quietly changes the world without needing applause. Rebecca rose without begging. She rose without shouting. She rose without hatred consuming her or bitterness poisoning her transformation. She simply became who she was always meant to be, and in doing so, she proved that quiet strength and truth are the most powerful forms of justice. The people who broke her wanted her to disappear. Instead, she became unforgettable. They wanted her to stay small. Instead, she became the ceiling they could never reach. They wanted her to believe she was nothing. Instead, she owned everything. And the greatest lesson of all, the same hands that signed divorce papers in a labor room later signed contracts that protected thousands. The same woman they discarded became the woman they could never afford to lose. Thank you for watching this story till the end. If it moved you, inspired you, or reminded you never to underestimate anyone, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Tell me in the comments, if you were Rebecca, would you have exposed Emika publicly or simply walked away with your new life in silence? And where are you watching from? United States, UK, Canada, Jamaica, South Africa, Nigeria, or anywhere else in the world? I'm reading every comment. Remember, sometimes the darkest moments are just the beginning of your greatest rise. Never let anyone define you at your lowest point, because your comeback might just rewrite everything they thought they knew about power. The moral of this story cuts deeper than revenge or justice. It's about the dangerous illusion that someone's current circumstances define their permanent worth. Emeka looked at Rebecca and saw only what she didn't have: money, status, corporate polish, and never saw what she possessed in abundance: loyalty, sacrifice, resilience, and a capacity for transformation that would eventually eclipse everything he thought made him superior. This story teaches us that cruelty is always short-sighted. When you humiliate someone at their weakest moment, you're not just being cruel in that instant. You're planting seeds of consequence you'll never see coming. Emeka forced Rebecca to sign papers while she screamed in labor, believing that moment was an ending. He had no idea it was the beginning of his own unraveling. Never measure someone's worth by their weakest moment, because weakness is temporary but character is permanent. The woman crying on a hospital bed might be months away from owning the hospital. The person you dismiss as just a housewife might have skills, intelligence, and strength you never bothered to recognize because you were too busy looking down. The moment you use to break someone might be the exact moment that reveals who they truly are beneath the surface you never cared to see. Power, patience, and truth will always outlast cruelty. Cruelty seeks immediate satisfaction. It needs to wound now, to dominate now, to feel superior now. But true power doesn't rush. It observes, it learns, it builds foundations while cruelty celebrates its hollow victories. Rebecca didn't storm back into Emeka's life screaming for revenge. She quietly became someone he could never touch, never reach, never hurt again. This story also reminds us that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes the person saying nothing is simply waiting for the right moment to speak in a way that cannot be ignored or dismissed. Rebecca's silence in those 4 months wasn't defeat. It was preparation. And perhaps most importantly, this story proves that how you rise matters as much as whether you rise. Rebecca could have destroyed Emeka with pure malice. She could have screamed, insulted, humiliated him the way he humiliated her. Instead, she rose with dignity, exposed truth rather than performed cruelty, and built a legacy of protection for others who suffered what she suffered. The woman forced to sign divorce papers in labor became the woman who rewrote hospital policies to protect vulnerable mothers. The woman called useless became the woman who employed hundreds and sheltered thousands. The woman discarded like garbage became the woman who proved that your value was never determined by those too blind to see it. So remember this: the person you underestimate today might be the person who defines your tomorrow. Treat everyone with respect, not because of what they have now, but because you never know who they're becoming. And if life ever brings you to your knees, remember Rebecca, because sometimes the floor is just where you plant your feet before you rise higher than anyone thought possible. Thank you so much for watching this story till the end. If it moved you, inspired you, or reminded you never to judge someone at their lowest moment, please like this video and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that reveal the truth about resilience, justice, and the quiet strength that changes everything. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their current situation is not their final destination. Share it with anyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or broken by people who should have protected them. This story matters because it proves that cruelty always has consequences and that patience, truth, and quiet power will always outlast loud hatred. Now tell me in the comments, if you were Rebecca, would you have exposed Emeka publicly the way she did? Or would you have simply walked away in silence with your new life and let him wonder what happened to you? What feels like true justice to you? Public accountability or private peace? And if you were in Emeka's position and discovered years later what you had thrown away, would there be any path to redemption? Or are some betrayals simply unforgivable? Is there a line that, once crossed, can never be uncrossed? Finally, tell me where you're watching from: United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Jamaica, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, or anywhere else in the world. I read every single comment, and your stories, your perspectives, and your support mean everything to this channel. Remember, never let anyone write your ending while you're still in the middle of your story. The same woman who signed papers in tears can become the woman who signs empires into existence. Your weakest moment is not your identity. It's just one chapter in a story that hasn't finished being written. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next story.